Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Ashley Griswa. I'm the chair-elect for 2021 for our COTE group here at AIA Austin. And Kendall is on the line and she's our fearless leader this year. And Miguel is our past chair. So we're happy to have everybody here joining us. And we want to start by thanking our sponsors. Indoor Weather Professionals, Pilgrim Building Company, and Hill and Wilkinson General Contractors for their support, allowing us to bring all this great content to you this year in a virtual format, and we look forward to hopefully being able to be in person at some point again. And just wanted to remind you of some upcoming events. We've got an exciting June ahead of us. So we will have our monthly meeting on June 3rd, where we'll be focusing on the affordable housing goals of the Climate Equity Plan. We've got a presentation on heat island mitigation here in the city of Austin on June 7th. At lunchtime on June 8th, we'll have our first in a series of environmental justice conversations focused on City of Austin policies and sort of past, present, and future approach to environmental justice. And then on June 17th, we're having the fourth in our four-part series of AIAU preview content, and we'll be focusing on resilience and adaptation, and specifically kind of talking about what happened here in Texas this winter and what some next steps could be to improve our resilience and adaptation. So please keep in touch with us and join us for those events. But without further ado, I would love to turn it over to Christoph and say thank you so much to Christoph for collecting our speakers and making this event possible today. So Christoph, take it away.
Okay, hello everybody. So welcome. It's my great honor to get to introduce to you a couple of speakers and the topics. I'll start with the topic and I'll start with a personal story. So I grew up in the Northeast where we didn't have air conditioning, but we had a ceiling, a whole house fan. And every night I would go to bed with that fan on, and then around midnight, 1 a.m., someone, usually my dad, would turn it off and it'd be like, oh, it's quiet now. And, but before, when the fan was running, I didn't notice it. And in a very similar way, environmental justice, racial justice, social justice, or in fact, you could say environmental injustice, which is the inequitable distribution of environmental burdens and benefits, is something that for all of our lives, all of you listening, all of you here, all of your life, all of the opportunities, the circumstances, your actions and reactions, if you haven't noticed, they have occurred in the context of environmental and social injustices. And I hope that this is the before times, like in my fan analogy, we will all see them more clearly as they start to turn off. So this is a topic that I think, that I know is going to be something that we all learn to be comfortable discussing, even though it is implicitly an uncomfortable sort of reality that we are asked to bear witness to. We're going to be discussing environmental justice today in the context of the chemical age, right? Better living through chemistry, the miracles of science. And not only are there a lot of leaders here, I mean, just wait till I talk to you about Roberto and Bill, but a lot of the COTE leaders, all of you are in fact leaders. You're somewhat of a self-selected group of leaders on this issue. And one thing that I was really pleased to hear when we were kind of doing one of our pre-conversations was Bill saying, with a lot of emphasis, the right people show up, even if it was just two of you, right? It's the right two of you that showed up. So are you raising your hand to speak, Roberto? No. Okay.
I was turning a light bulb that was right in my eyes.
Okay. So the last comment I had is that I think a lot of us know that the Clean Air Act, the clean air legislation, has been called one of the most impactful pieces of legislation ever in U.S. history in terms of the environment. And it is also true that that act has not impacted people of color the same way it has affected people of not color, white people. So today we're going to be talking about environmental justice in the chemical age. And we have Roberto Valle. Oh my goodness, where are my notes? Hold on one second. Speak amongst yourselves. Actually, you know what? I'm going to just smoothly handle this. We have Roberto Valle and Bill Walsh. Roberto, would you please introduce yourself and your role with the Healthy Building Network?
Yes, hello everybody. So I am the HomeFree manager. I started working with the Healthy Building Network about a year ago, actually, last Wednesday. That was 1 year.
Yay.
And yeah, I'm happy to tell you today about HomeFree, which is this program that helps you, affordable housing leaders, practitioners, building developers, managers, architects, owners, to choose healthier options. My background or my interest started from energy efficiency. I was interested in reducing energy use through behavior change. I wasn't much into the technology. I was more into how can we get people motivated, inspired, or even change behavior by changing our practice, which doesn't require a change in attitude necessarily. And now I found myself here in the world of building materials. I don't have a background that is in chemistry, and jumping into this, it was. I'll keep it short. I'll just say that it was. I jumped into the pool, and it has, I think, in 1 year, changed my practice, my own personal practices in many ways. I'm happy to share.
Great intro. So I can tell you a little bit about Bill. I've been following him for quite a while. He is the force behind healthy product declarations or health product declarations. And I learned in the intro, talking to him last time, that he actually came out of Greenpeace many years ago and had a kind of a fork in the road moment in his career. And that's how he's ended up here. So Bill, would you please introduce yourself, say hello, and tell us your background a little bit, your career.
Sure. Thank you, Christoph. And I'm really pleased to be here today and speaking to folks in Austin. As Christoph mentioned, I had worked in the environmental movement for about 15 years. Most of my work had been focused on the issue of toxic chemical pollution. And most of that work actually had been working as an ally and supporter of the then nascent environmental justice movement in the United States, and working a lot in the deep south of our country, the chemical corridor between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, known as Cancer Alley, and the Gulf Coast region of Texas and Louisiana, which is a high concentration of petrochemical facilities, as you know. And I had the inspiration to start the Healthy Building Network because the materials flow through the building industry are so huge that making changes in this industry can really have a direct impact on the lives of people in these fence line communities. If we can make our building materials supply chains healthier, we can do a great benefit not only to the building occupants, but to the places where our materials come from, to the workers who are installing them in our buildings and maintaining them, and then to the places where they go after their intended use in our buildings. So there's great potential here in this industry, and I think the industry has responded very well and openly to these opportunities, and we'll talk a little bit about that later today. I did want to say too, by way of introduction, that when I started HBN in 2000, literally one of the first phone calls I made was to Austin, Texas, to the Center for Maximum Potential Building
Studies.
Systems, and to Gail Vittori, and I don't know if she's on the webinar today, but she and Plenty, were path breakers, and the Austin Green Builder program at the time, long before LEED, was really a beacon of sustainability and progressive work within the building industry. But I had been introduced to Gail because she was also an activist in the community, and had been part of the effort to stop the siting of an incinerator in Austin. And it was that combination that was kind of my role model of what I thought I could do in the building industry. And it's really ironic that today, and we'll talk about this a little bit more as we go along today. Today, we're looking at an expansion of incineration to burn all the plastic that we're producing. And that has incredible unjust implications for the nation and for our citizens. But really, my connection to Austin goes back as far as the history of HBN goes. So I'm really pleased to be here today.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Gail, I do notice you're here. If you have any comments, feel free to
great.
Chime in.
Gail. Unfair to call on somebody.
Yeah.
for start of the game.
Sorry about that. Okay, so Roberto has a few slides to go through, and I just want to remind us, please stay present. Your presence and your attention is really important force in our world. Don't just succumb to like transmit receive mode, where this is like a standard lunch and learn, where it's a bit of a sedative and you just sit there and receive it. So this is an engaged conversation we're hoping to set up here. So with that, Roberto, please introduce the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Christoph. And on that note, we're going to keep it short so that we can emphasize the conversation, which is what we're very interested in. So let me share really quickly. And actually, Bill is going to kick us off today. So.
Okay, great. Yes, let me, we thought before, we do really want to have an engaged conversation, and I really appreciate that format because I think that's how the best ideas get shared. But for those of you all who don't know the Healthy Building Network, we wanted to take a few quick minutes to introduce ourselves and our work and show you how we try to put our principles into practice around environmental justice in a couple of key ways. First, our mission statement is that all people on the planet thrive when the environment is free of toxic chemicals. And all means all of us in the United States and all of us globally. It means not only the building occupants, but the people who put our buildings together and those who manufacture the materials that we use. We do that at HBN through three major tranches of work. One is research and policy. We do deep dives into materials, product content, and in manufacturing. I think it's fair to say we know as much about how building materials are manufactured in general as just about anybody except the manufacturers themselves. And we publish this in white papers and reports and some tools that Roberto will be showing you in just a minute. Among those tools include very robust databases. One of them is called the Pharos Project. It has over 150,000 chemicals that are analyzed against over 70 authoritative hazard lists and restricted substance lists, and give you visual readouts of what types of hazards are associated with what types of chemicals. And that information is also fed into other databases, such as the Health Product Declaration Collaborative's HPD Builder. And so we invest a lot in having in transparency and having as much data as possible upon which to base our decisions. And then we work on education and capacity building, and Roberto will be taking a few minutes to tell you specifically about a major tool there called HomeFree. So why do materials matter? One reason is the scale of use in building materials. If you can just click through the next buttons, Roberto. So, for example, one of the first things we worked on in Health Building Network was the use of arsenic and pressure-treated wood. The building industry was the #1 use of arsenic up until 2004, when it was phased out of many uses of pressure-treated wood. The building industry is currently the #2 user of plastics after packaging, so it has an enormous impact on all the debates we're having around plastics today. It was the #1 use of a chemical called phthalates, which are used to soften plastics, in particular vinyl or PVC plastic. This is a chemical that's banned in many uses for children, but is still, and it's being gradually phased out of our interior products, but it's still used, in tons of phthalates, which cause endocrine disruption, asthma inducing functions in your lungs, and still used in all sorts of flexible vinyl, such as membrane roofing products, for example. And 50% worldwide use, I think there's probably one more click, Roberto, of formaldehyde. Many people don't realize how formaldehyde is used, but more than half of it is used in our building materials to hold things together, to bind fibers, for example. So the scale of our materials is one reason why it matters and indicative of the influence we can have. There's also an assumption people make that if chemicals are used in our products, someone has approved them for use and tested them to make sure they're safe. That's actually not true. It's the opposite is true. Chemicals are effectively presumed innocent until proven guilty, and we've had very little testing. We have perhaps 80,000 or so chemicals registered for use in commerce. Maybe 200 of them have been subject to deep scrutiny, but only a handful, fewer than 10, have actually been banned from use in our building materials through various ways. And usually that's through litigation or through custom and not through the law. So our laws are really not protecting us from the chemical toxicity. That's why we look to these private sector methods. And also, we have made a lot of progress in the building industry on removing VOCs from our built environment, volatile organic chemicals that can have a wide variety of health impacts, ranging from asthma to cancer to endocrine disruption. But despite that progress, it's important to note that many of the chemicals we're exposed to in daily life are not volatile organic chemicals. The VOCs are chemicals that are a gas at ambient temperatures, but many chemicals attach to dust. They never have a gaseous phase at all. Heavy metals, for example, like lead. So there's much more we need to do in terms of getting chemicals out of the products we use, because it's not possible to control it through other means, such as, say, mechanical ventilation. And of course, even though we make our occupants healthier through better ventilation, that doesn't address the disproportionate impacts that these toxics have on communities and workers. So that's why we take a whole chemical approach. And we also take a life cycle approach to our analysis of chemicals. So we're looking at the communities where these chemicals are being produced and what the agenda is of the environmental justice groups in those communities, and trying to complement that environmental justice agenda with the standards that we set within HBN and that we advocate for within other standards in the industry. We're looking at the impacts on installation and the workers that both make the materials and are installing them in the first instance in our buildings. And we're looking at the global impacts, chemicals that can last a long time in the environment, build up in the environment. We see chemicals such as PCBs and dioxins all the way in animal populations and even in indigenous populations in the Arctic Circle, far from any source of chemical production. So we take this view into account as we develop all of our policies and recommendations. Next slide. And when Roberto shows you some of our color-coded, we call them the stoplight charts, the red to green recommendations on types of building products, I just want you to know that in all of our evaluations, we don't consider it green if it's only healthy for the occupant. We only put it in the green category if based on our life cycle analysis, we think it's among the healthier products for all people along the supply chain. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Roberto. A lot of our work in our first 15 years was really focused on the supply chain of building products and policies that could drive improvements in the way we manufacture our materials. And typically, the healthier products were entering the market at the higher ends, and with the idea that there might be a cost premium, and eventually with volume, we could bring those costs down. But about 6 years ago, with support from the JPB Foundation in New York City, we started a program called HomeFree, which is dedicated to accelerating the adoption of healthier materials in the affordable housing industry, bringing healthier built environments to communities that are often exposed disproportionately to multiple sources of toxic exposure just by virtue of the zip code in which they're located. And Roberto is going to tell you a little bit about how this direct connection to disproportionately impacted populations can be a way of creating a healthier environment for people who need it most. Roberto?
Thank you, Bill. And you were doing so great. I was ready to sit back. Thank you. So I think in the understanding that it is the people who are disproportionately impacted by toxic chemicals and used in building materials are the ones who are less likely to receive the benefits. That's part of why HomeFree exists, right? To really make it available and just develop the resources, the tools, so that people like you, again, affordable housing leaders, practitioners, have a simple way or recommendations to choose healthier options. And again, that impact not just the user, but just really thinking from a life cycle perspective. The way that we work in HomeFree is that we work with two very dynamic, great communities, which is the affordable housing community and the environmental health community. And the premise is that by working with the people who have the experience, the skills, the knowledge about regionally specific solutions, and then putting it together with environmental health partners that can link the dots between these solutions, the materials that are being used, and the impacts on the health of individuals along the life cycle of the product, then we can develop recommendations that can move us to a safer baseline, safer options. One aspect that is very important for us in HomeFree, and HomeFree is, well, should have started there, is an online free platform of resources that you can access at any time. What is very important for us is that the solutions that we put forth, they make sense for the affordable housing sector. And by making sense, it means that they have to be at the right cost and that they meet the performance. And the discussion of cost is one that often pops up when we're talking about affordable housing. Perceptions about materials being more expensive. And I'll say perceptions because there has to be an awareness that safer options exist, that there are options that cost the same or that don't come at a much premium, and that perform as well. So awareness is an important part of the solution. So in order to do this work and find these solutions, we work with a group of HomeFree champions, which are our affordable, again, the developers and architects, and not just that, even educators and friends that work in the policy arena, to really help us identify, test, and scale solutions, and really envision what a path to a safer or healthier built environment looks like. I think strategically, well, we can split our strategy in two. One is identifying solutions on the ground, and that is working with them to identify healthier material alternatives. So we're working, for example, with a few of our partners to identify healthier flooring options that can move the industry away from the use of vinyl floors or carpets, particularly carpets that contain, I think as Bill was mentioning, fly ash or contain PFAS that is used as a stain repellent, or that have backings that contain vinyl or polyurethane. That's the last chemistry word that we use. But also we're working right now to develop healthier material guidelines or basis of design that you can use to scale or improve the specification of healthier options in your own building portfolio. But once we identify these options, it is really important for us to work with partners to scale the solutions. So that's when our work with collaboratives like Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future or the Housing Partnership Network, which collectively well, for SAFE, I can speak that they collectively manage about 150,000 rental homes, affordable housing rental homes. And it is really important because collectively we can leverage their power to not only test or identify solutions that work in different contexts, but together, because of their collective buying power, we can find ways to get some options at better price. We can signal the market the commitment to and preference for healthier options. I'll say one more partnership that is important to the way that we work, and is our support with enterprise green communities criteria. So to support green building certifications, particularly those that demand or have specifications for healthier materials. So we work with enterprise over the years to develop and recommend their healthier materials criteria. We developed resources so that if you find yourself meeting the enterprise green communities criteria, we have a specific guidance to help you support it. And we also advocated for the inclusion of transparency requirements. So we're strong advocates for transparency as a cornerstone of moving the industry to safer options. To know what is in the building materials that you use is very important as a first step to understanding and optimization of these materials. going down to the tools and very close to wrapping this presentation, it's our information or research. Well, the translation of the research into resources is organized in product categories. And this is one of our main tools for you. So right now we have work done across 10 product categories: flooring, paint, drywall, countertops, as you can see. Within each of the product categories, what you will find is, for example, at the top, a checklist of what to look out for in a specific product category. For example, in insulation, prefer fiberglass or formaldehyde-free mineral wool. On the left side, you also have related resources, and this is a collection of webinars and case studies, reports, but also, depending on, I think for paint and insulation, we have a specification language that you can use, almost copy, cut, paste in your own specifications to start using healthier options, and also provides some recommendations to specific products that you can use. But back to the center, as Bill noted, the stoplight chart, which is our hazard spectrum. And the hazard spectrum is this green to red, red to green, and looking where, whichever way you're looking, is a traffic light approach to selecting a healthier option that is based on HBN's in-depth research into the content and the hazards associated with a specific materials. And we use this information to compare or rate the different materials within a product category. So you can use this, and again, very importantly, this is not just about the hazard to the people who are in the building. This is about the hazards of the people who work in the manufacturing of these products, in the installation. Think about to the recycling or the disposal of these products. And you can use this in different ways. For example, and we hear a lot from our partners, use it very early in the design process when you're still choosing the material, the type of material that you're going to use. And for example, here in insulation, you have from fiberglass to blown-in cellulose to all that way at the bottom, spray polyurethane foam. So if it's in the red, we say avoid it. If it's in the green, that those are typically better, but you can choose somewhere in between. Sometimes some options don't make sense because they cost too much, or maybe because you have to order them from halfway around the world. And then there's other considerations about carbon impact, and we're happy, I'm sure that we're gonna be happy to talk a little bit about that as well. But yes, take it early in your consideration about the material you're going to use, take a step up, and then you can go to your manufacturer and choose for transparency. And that's the way that you can use it to benchmark your own practice. To end this, I'm just going to say that please visit HomeFree. I'm going to share the link in the chat. We have a wide variety of resources and tools, specifications, guidelines, templates you can use to reach out to manufacturers and request transparency, even transparency in recycling, which is very important. So you don't get legacy contaminants into recycled products and you don't put them again into use. Courses, case studies, webinars will be renovated and revamping the website. And in the next 2 weeks, we're going to have a survey. So I'll encourage you to keep coming back until you hit that survey and give us your feedback about what you think about the resources and tools and share them with your peers. So I'll close it at that. There's our email. I'll also put it in the chat so we can continue the conversation.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you all. I have lots of comments and questions to move us forward if no one else does. But first, I'd love to hear from y'all listening, or I can call on you. I'm kidding. So who has a question? Who has a comment? You could put it in the chat. You could show us your live video and say hello. You could just do the audio. So please. Somebody has something to say.
I have a question.
Go, Lee.
This is
Hello.
Lee. Hi. I've had a couple of customers ask me recently about hemp insulation, both the blocks and I think some kind of blown in, and I didn't see that on your list, so I wondered if you were working on analyzing that one.
What do you guys think, Bill, Roberto?
I don't know if Bill, I can probably repeat what Rebecca says. Rebecca, who is our senior researcher, and then you can help me out here, Bill. We're definitely considering new materials. We don't have it yet, which it doesn't mean that it's not important. So we're taking considering different materials that make sense. So up to what I know, we are considering, we haven't included, but your comments about what you would like to see in the hazard spectrums are really important for us to expand our research. I cannot speak about the benefits, but Bill, maybe you have.
I'm not sure I'm familiar with the exact product. Did you say it was blown in hemp fibers?
I think the brand name for one of them is Hempcrete.
Oh, so Hempcrete, yes. So I don't know if we've done an in-depth look at Hempcrete, but from everything I would know about Hempcrete, that is likely to fall on the greener end of the spectrum. But I don't think we've completed a full analysis of that yet to put it in the spectrum. Part of the challenge in those and all of those things is really getting full disclosure of the information and being able to double check that and verify it ourselves. And since Hempcrete is just starting to crack the market in the US, we haven't had that in there. We've tended to prioritize in our insulation work the high volume uses, really as a result of the type of funding that we've gotten that's been looking at retrofitting. That's where a lot of our funding has come from. But I do feel pretty confident in Hempcrete that in general, you're going to see it on the higher end of the spectrum.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So Lee, since you were brave enough to speak up, and thank you. I've been on lots of projects for lots of years here in Austin, and I noticed that when it comes to multifamily, particularly like with foundation communities or something like that, they often are participating in the green building program, but usually at lower tiers, 1 or 2 star levels. And I'm just curious, maybe you could disclose, like, generally, not a specific project, are they choosing the points that would correspond to reducing chemical exposures?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would have to go look at a report and get back to you on that.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
I don't know. We have some required, though, basic requirements.
Exactly.
Related to that. So all the projects have to do that. But I couldn't tell you whether most of the projects are choosing to deal with the healthy materials measures outside of foundation communities, which is our star participant in the program for multifamily.
Okay. Well, good. I want to just kind of summarize what we heard, right? There is a lot of messaging out there that's basically like, yikes, right? The yikes message is coming through from so many different perspectives right now. And we really need to combine that with the, oh, yikes, and better options exist. Other options exist. Safer options exist. That's so important that you connect that. You take the energy that would be associated with the fear of conventional, traditional practices, and you quickly map it into, and there's other options. And then comes like this, I don't know, you need to make it personal so that you can communicate it effectively. Mammals are highly relational. And if you speak with passion and conviction, that alone is one of the most powerful forces. And so that would be my question to, to you, Roberto, and you, Bill. I find that people tend to stop at talk to me about the problem. How have you learned ways to help them move to the solution and scaling the solution? It's a bit of a nebulous question, but maybe you have some comments.
Well, we're seeing a lot of movement, towards solutions, especially in this industry where people are designers, looking at recreating a different future. So the biggest inhibition I find today to all of our good intentions is information and transparency about our products. So I noticed in the chat that Gail mentioned there's going to be a Hempcrete panel. There's the Hemp Building Association is going to be here in Austin in October. And, you know, I really encourage engaging with organizations like that and stressing the need for transparency. It can be kind of a barrier for new products sometimes to put the resources into filling out a health product declaration, for example. But we really need to be able to, you know, make our case based on data and information. So that is the number one barrier we face now in really realizing our best intentions is the uncertainty that one product will truly be better than another when you look at all the myriad of factors that we're trying to consider. And we can get, you know, paralyzed. You can get paralysis by analysis, right? Because there's so many factors and so many things going on that if you're looking for one clear answer, you're very unlikely to get it when you subject it to kind of a matrix analysis of all the different issues that you're trying to address through one simple building material. However, what I would say you can do is you take steps that really reflect your values and your client's values in a particular project. There may be, you know, if you're building a facility for children, a great emphasis on reducing the exposure to asthmagens or reproductive toxicants for all children. And so I would say, you know, do your best with the tools that we have available and always, always, always be pressing for more transparency and full disclosure. Even if that data that is complicated and not something that you can use tomorrow in your practice because you're not a chemist, it's a signal when a company provides the data that they're willing to engage in a dialogue with the community and with other materials experts, such as those here at HBN or in other organizations, the International Living Future Institute, for example, Green Enterprise Green Communities programs. It's a good signal that they're engaging. And when we have that data, we can provide more informed advice for people. Mm-hmm. Christoph, I also noticed people were asking about our life cycle assessment methodology and the intersection with carbon. And, you know, on insulation, one of the great things about our analysis on insulation is that it correlates very closely to the embodied carbon footprint of materials. And if you look at some of the work by Architecture 2030 or someone like Chris Magwood, Bruce King, you can find analyses of insulation from a embodied carbon perspective that look a lot like the stoplight chart we put up from a hazard perspective. So the natural materials will be both greener from a toxicity perspective and better from a carbon perspective. And when you get to the plastic materials, the blown foam insulation, they're highly toxic and also carry a higher carbon footprint. So if you think about it, it makes sense to a certain degree that many of the toxic substances that we're concerned about are petrochemicals. So if we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint through the use of petroleum, minimizing the use of petroleum products, it makes sense to detoxify as well.
Absolutely. And I think we're all getting this perspective now. I hope we are. As we're all starting to focus on carbon over the last 10 years or so, there's this implicit assumption that the nature of our destroyer will be mapped into the carbon space, which is not necessarily true, right? So environmental justice, social justice, racial justice, chemical exposures, the suffering of families, none of these directly map into measuring carbon. Carbon has the benefit of being broadly and devastatingly impactful and also relatively easy to measure. And because of those two things, we tend to see the future solutions as measured by carbon, when in fact traditional LCAs overtly exclude the nature of, the function of the environment producing the resources. We just assume, oh, there's oil, we go get it, and there's a carbon emission associated with getting it and using it. So that was a relatively longer than I meant, but carbon is one metric in a range of metrics, and yet it's getting a disproportionate share of the attention right now.
One thing I'll say though on carbon, Christoph, is when you look at so if you look at material sectors, it's widely understood that concrete and steel are have two of the largest carbon footprints,
right?
From a materials perspective. The third largest sector in terms of direct carbon emission are chemicals and plastics. And that is because obviously these products are made with petroleum or natural gas, and they take an immense amount of energy to manufacture. So the third, if you look at it as a sector, plastics within the chemical class become the third largest direct emissions of carbon.
Wow.
Though from a building perspective, the relative footprint and relative impact will be much higher from the concrete and the steel. However, if you look at what they call the total carbon demand, or the total fossil fuel demand of these products, material sectors, the impacts actually become inverted, because so much oil and gas go in to the actual plastic and petrochemical product, the coatings, the sealants, et cetera, that when you look at the overall fossil fuel demand, chemicals and plastics has a higher footprint than concrete and steel. So all this is to say, not to get paralyzed by all this, but reducing our use of virgin plastics and other petrochemicals is an essential part of the strategy for bending the curve on our carbon emissions and reaching our climate goals. When it comes to concrete and steel, those are clearly the two biggest sectors that the building industry should tackle. When it comes to other interior finished products, there really isn't a carbon number that makes a granular distinction between one type of flooring and another. The carbon tools are not meant to do that. People will tell you that, who know those tools. That's the first thing. But overall, minimizing petrochemicals and plastics is definitely an important contribution to minimizing the overall global carbon footprint of the building industry.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Christoph, I think Phoebe has her hand raised. She may have a question.
Oh, please, Phoebe.
Hi. Hi, everyone. So I work with the City of Austin Office of Sustainability. And so I'm kind of using the lens of thinking about our building goals. And, you know, we did have a section on embodied carbon, but I also work on regional air quality issues. And one of the new initiatives that the regional group is trying to push forward is focusing on PM specifically, and dust emissions that come from construction, and part of that is, you know, pushing for deconstruction instead of demolition, and so I'm wondering if there's any educational materials or resources out there for that can help you know, people understand the advantages of deconstruction, not in, you know, obviously like a carbon emissions or even dust emissions perspective, but really taking into account the toxicity and the exposure to both workers and, you know, surrounding communities of these buildings. And so I just wanted, you know, thought I'd ask if there are any resources that you all know of that focus on that, like the health impact of demolition and trying to push towards, you know, deconstruction where feasible from a health perspective.
So deconstruction is not a topic that we cover specifically in our work. Ours is more about the nature of materials, but a few resources that I am familiar with. There is a deconstruction organization. Their name is escaping me, but they do have an annual conference. And I can follow up with you, Phoebe, or I can send to Christoph the name, because I was engaging with them last year and I just can't remember the name, but so there is a national organization of deconstruction organizations that probably have a lot that they could offer you. There's a group called the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, ILSR.org, that has historically done a lot of work on deconstruction that I'm familiar with. They might have resources that are also helpful to you. So those are the two main sources that I can think of.
I think I was doing a little bit of research on that, and if you're looking to quantify, I think that's something that I couldn't necessarily find. I think there are too many variables to throw into that model. But yeah, generally speaking, right? If you're thinking about deconstruction and the use of then design to deconstruct, I think that's the most important part of it. So they use mechanical joints that do not use adhesives. And that's one of the areas where we find, okay, so if you really design to deconstruct and use mechanical joints, then you avoid the use of toxic adhesives, for example. But I will share what I found with you. It's really good.
Okay, and just to chime in on it, the concrete and steel, we need to put glass kind of in there as a little bit because it's both high embodied carbon, and of course it leads to high operational carbon.
One other resource too for Phoebe too is there's a group called the Building Products Ecosystem, and they are doing two great pilot projects. One is on true recycling, closing the loop on wallboard, which can be quite a source of dust in interior renovations, and they have information on successfully starting and implementing programs for circularity in wallboard, and also using glass, crushed glass, pozzolan as an additive for cement instead of for concrete instead of Portland cement. So building product ecosystems .org, I think it is a great resource for those two specific initiatives.
Yeah, okay. Mark Ledger has a good question. I don't know if Roberto, if you can see it in the chat, but he's wondering if you guys have been able to track success stories around choosing healthier products generally, and then specifically on fence line communities. Either of you, Bill, Roberto, any thoughts on that?
Roberto has some specific success stories from affordable housing partners, but let me say on the aggregate, one of the things that we like to do is look at can we bend the curve on a particular type of chemical use or emission, and we have seen some great success stories there that speak to the power of collective action. In my introductory remarks, I mentioned arsenic and pressure treated wood. When that was when that use was phased out voluntarily by the industry, I might add, in advance of an EPA regulation that would make it impermissible to use arsenic in most applications of pressure treated wood, we saw a dramatic decline in the use of arsenic, the importation of arsenic into the United States, decreasing it by 80%. And so that has great impacts both in terms of where that arsenic was being mined, which was principally in Chile and China. So you can imagine the conditions there. Yeah. It has a great impact on the use of the chemical in pressure treating cylinders and the pollution that causes, and obviously also for users. Formaldehyde, we've tracked dramatic reductions in the emissions of formaldehyde from engineered wood manufacturing facilities and also from fiberglass manufacturing facilities. Fiberglass batt insulation used to be bound together with formaldehyde binders. That was completely phased out in 2015. The last formaldehyde binders rolled off the assembly line in 2015 in North America. That was about a 10-year process from when those products were introduced. But again, we've been able to, that makes it healthier for workers, makes it healthier for occupants, but we were able to track the dramatic reductions in formaldehyde emissions from the manufacturing facilities. So that speaks to the health of fence line communities. So we do have some great examples of how that tracks kind of at scale. Now, Roberto, if you want to talk about some of the case studies or work of affordable housing.
Yes, no, I think that you spoke directly to the question, because the case studies that we have in HomeFree are about the success in using healthier options. But I mean, to the question, tracking the direct impact of a particular project on fence line communities, that's one of the difficulties of how do you measure the impact of work like this that takes so long to register. But it's to what Bill was speaking about. So when we're talking about trends, about how some chemicals have been phased out, I think that's the important story at the end of the day. So yeah.
Okay, good. Other questions? I think that we've had some good discussion so far. I know that the air quality issue is a really big metric in terms of people of color are breathing dirtier air generally, even independent of whether they're rural or urban or somewhat independent of income level. And that's at the heart of this topic today is trying to understand that it's not just yikes, society in general is, leading us astray, perhaps. It's also that it's leading to disproportionate burdens to certain groups. And we've had a lot of good resources come out.
Yes, in fact, if it used to be that we had to present these studies, and it was difficult for people to kind of find it in their daily life. Today, if you Google environmental justice, you're going to get a lot of articles in the past year or 5 years that can talk to you about issues like this. For example, studies that show, federal government studies that show that Black people, regardless of income level, are disproportionately exposed to toxics and suffer disproportionate health impacts that are associated with toxic exposures than white people. So a wealthy Black person living, cohorts that are in wealthier zip codes are still, over the course of their lives, exposed to much higher toxic burdens than even poorer white people. And there are also studies that show in industrial corridors that the impacts of the pollution from these industries disproportionately affect people of color, while the jobs available in those industries, the well-paying jobs available in those industries, do not equally flow to communities of color. So there are many inequities that are kind of structurally built into the system. Even the location of our industrial facilities is a legacy that's very difficult to unwind, because it's linked up to redlining, where industrial zones, there's a great book on redlining that was published in the last 2 years. And if you look at, it's called The Color of Law, and that analysis shows you that not only was redlining done in such a way that communities of color were located adjacent to industrial facilities, but even where neighborhoods such as in central Los Angeles, established neighborhoods of African Americans, were then infiltrated with industrial facilities by random zoning exceptions and exclusions targeted to infiltrate residential areas. So there's a real legacy of creating this disproportionate impact. If you go to the south, that chemical corridor between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, many of the petrochemical facilities there are literally located on plantations. In fact, the names of them are often called, Plantation Unit 1, Plantation Unit 2. And what's happening there is not only that the plantations have been turned into industrial plantations, but after the Civil War, formerly enslaved peoples established communities, oftentimes adjacent to the plantations, which they were attached, and became sharecropping families. And there's a rich legacy of some of our first African-American founded communities in Louisiana that hearken from that era, were then, by the World War II era and the Jim Crow era, industrial facilities crept in there and just overswept those historic African-American communities. So the inequities are really hardwired into our industrial material systems. So when I think about the vision for the future, I think about a vision where we're completely revolutionizing manufacturing such that the facilities are closed loop and become regions that anyone would be happy to live in, that the industrial transformation has to take place at a scale that makes it healthier to live next to that facility, whoever you are, because the idea that we're going to relocate the facilities and kind of equitably distribute petrochemical factories at this point in our history is just a fantasy.
Wow. So I guess we're kind of coming down to final questions. That was a sobering topic, that Bill, that, you know, this has not been done by oops. It's been done intentionally in many regards. I want to remind everyone, we're coming to the end here, that Roberto has this survey he would like you to go to the website and fill out. Is the survey currently available? Oh,
Not yet.
okay.
I'll
So
definitely
soon.
share it with you. Yes, it's coming soon.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, let me, I don't want to end on a negative note. So let me just say two positive things.
All
First
right.
of all, the Materials Knowledge Working Group of your own AIA has done an excellent job of building in equity. I know there are DEI initiatives within the AIA overall, but if you look at the work that the Materials Knowledge Working Group has done, it bakes in a kind of a life cycle analysis into its recommendations for how materials should be selected. So in Canon 6 of the AIA Code of Conduct and Ethics, it says members should select and use building materials to minimize exposures to toxins and pollutants in the environment to promote environmental and human health and reduce waste and pollution. So that is looking beyond just the building occupant and looking at the larger footprint of the products. And also in Canon 2, on the section on environmental equity and justice, it does say that members should advise clients and employers of their obligations to the environment, including access to clean air, water for all, and a built environment that equitably supports human health. So we are trying to, and we do see the profession trying to institutionalize this type of approach. And the other recommendation I would make to people is that the National Organization of Minority Architects has a conference in October. Registration is open now, and that is open to all. And I've attended this conference for a few years, and I would really recommend it as a great way to hear brothers and sisters in the profession speaking for themselves, defining the issues themselves, exploring the issues themselves from the perspective of people of color in the profession. And it's a great way to be informed, educated, and inspired about where we can do and what we can do and how we can build solidarity together in the whole industry.
That's a great way to end it. It's a great way to end it. So thank you all so much for your time and attention. And Bill and Roberto, thank you so much for all that you've put into this and all that you've done leading to coming here and that you will do. So all of us, this is just a start. As you know, we're going to keep hearing this drumbeat throughout the rest of our careers. So thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Really a pleasure.
Bye.
Have a good one.
You too.
This is where they go.